Today I want to talk about how to bring life back to old photographs. If you've been around long enough, you have boxes full of old print photographs before the digital age that you look at them now and they seem impossible to paint from because now we use a computer screen that's illuminated from behind and all the colors look bright and the values are clear. And we look at the old prints and they just look dingy. But they're a good excuse to use to kind of develop your own sense of color and not rely on a digital photograph for your color. So, as an exercise to think outside the box color wise and value wise to create better paintings. Okay, now today we're talking about adding life to your paintings when there isn't any in the photograph. And in particular, I'm talking about old print photographs that we had to use last century. And if you've been painting long enough, then you have boxes of old 4x6 prints. They're always hard to see because none of us were good photographers. But we had a decent camera. We had to buy the film, have it developed, and then we're stuck with these photographs that you couldn't adjust. I guess you could take them back to the developer and adjust things, but that got really expensive. But I can remember going on painting trips for a week or two and doing 10, 12, 15 paintings and using, I don't know, 15, 20 rolls of film and coming back and having to spend a few $100s having those developed. So glad, so thankful for digital photography where it's, you don't have to worry about how many pictures you're taking. You can get back to the studio and get rid of ones you're not going to use. I have boxes of these photographs from painting trips, and a lot of them are good compositions. The values aren't great. Color is awful. Some of them might be because it's faded or because I set a cup on it and it left an imprint like this one. But a lot of good compositions, a lot of nice things to work from. So I want to talk about how to use those and what to think about in terms of changing and creating more interest, more exciting paintings out of an old, poorly colored photograph. And you can see in this one, this is near Taos, painting trip I made there in probably 85, 86. I think I have decent compositions, nice shapes to work with. But color-wise, there's not much there. Everything is faded. Now, again, that could be faded just because of over time the photographs didn't hold the color. But I want to create images that work better. And what the photograph does do is give me decent values. It doesn't discriminate value-wise. The shadows on the tree are pretty much the same as the shadows in the fence, which are almost the same as the small darks in the background. So I want to create some value differences to show depth. The darks in the foreground being a bit darker than the darks in the background. And I want to decide where I want the darkest dark so I can draw the eye there. And the other thing is how many values. And as I reconstruct this, I want to think in terms of 2 to 3 values that I'm going to set up here. So the background hills are going to have 2 values. Trees are going to have 3. They're closer. Plus they need 3 values to make it more 3-dimensional. 2 would work, but still somewhat flat. But that third value is going to make it turn a little bit more. Same thing with the pine tree, although I don't think I used 3 values in the pine tree. And you'll see how it doesn't quite have the 3 dimensions once I show that to you. So, and then the same thing in the foreground, shrubbery / tall grass here. I want 3 distinct values. So 2 to 3 values, and I want to choose a color. And I want to go maybe more of a muted blue in the distant hills, blue-green in these kind of middle ground hills. And I'm going to go with several different colors, very muted in these bare they're cottonwoods, probably cottonwood trees. Very grade variety of color, anywhere from violet to green to yellow. And the color, while the color is obviously important, it's less important than what value I make that color. And that being said, I can choose to pick a color that's maybe not as realistic as I would see outside, or definitely not from a photograph. So don't hesitate to think outside the box color-wise just because you think, well, that tree could never be that color. The goal is to create a color harmony and a sense of depth and sense of light that really draws someone into the painting. The goal should never be trying to just mix realistic color, because at times realistic color doesn't work as well. Maybe you need to think outside the box color-wise. And color is always more of a personal choice, whether you use really muted colors all the time or a lot stronger colors. That's more of a personal choice. It's the composition and the values that's going to make it work. So let's go to, and I did this on the computer. I haven't done these as far as paintings yet. And when I do this, is done in Procreate on an iPad and an Apple Pencil, and fairly easy to use. There's all kinds of tutorials on YouTube, and I picked one that was about 40 minutes long and gave me all the information that I need. But you can see, starting in the background, I'm using 3 values in the background mountain. I added some snow back there, added some snow to the photograph as well. But you can see there's a little bit of snow up in there. But I made the background hill a little bit bigger. 3 values, 2 values in the snow, a value for the trees, a little shape right here of a cliff or a hill in front. It's a dark violet. So I'm using violet in 3 values. Some of it's muted, some of it's a little stronger, but 3 definite values. Same thing with the hill here. I'm going with more of a yellow-green because the pine trees here, they're a lot closer. So I want the depth or the difference between this hill and the background mountains. So get the shadow dark enough that it pulls forward, but still cool enough and light enough that it doesn't jump forward like these values in front. And to me, this is just yellow-green with orange in it, or burnt sienna, some kind of reddish orange and yellow-green that gives it that color. In the photograph, there's really nothing there. This is pretty much a monochromatic brownish photograph. Maybe at one point it had color. Then in the trees in front, going back to the mid-ground mountain, using that blue in the shadow to make the shadow stay back, then the shadows in front aren't quite that cool. They're cool compared to the lights, but they're a lot warmer shadows in front here compared to the background shadows, which are a lot bluer. And that separates them. Makes the foreground shadows come forward because they're not as cool as the background shadows. Then the trees here, I'm picking kind of a reddish violet, very muted. So alizarin crimson and a little bit of yellow-green added to it, maybe to mute that alizarin crimson. Now again, this is Procreate. I'm not mixing colors, but I always think in terms of the colors on my palette. Then the shadow here would be kind of the same, maybe green and alizarin crimson, or green and burnt sienna, or blue and burnt sienna for the darks down here. Just something that's a darker value. Then I went with Viridian over here with a little alizarin crimson or burnt sienna. 3 values. 2 different colors for the cottonwoods. Probably don't see a green like that until springtime. But again, I can pick whatever color I want. I'm the artist, not the camera, and certainly not just what I see outside. Pick colors that are going to be harmonious and suggest the light. Tree here, on the pine tree on the right, the big dark one, I just have 2 values, letting some of that deadish brown of the photograph show through. Maybe creates a little bit of a third. But I wanted a different green here than the background hill green. This is a bit more yellow-green. This is very muted, the kind of spruce type trees that aren't real green. They're a bit more of a real grade Viridian and alizarin crimson and ochre type color. Then the fence I just kind of left as it was. I liked the value of the darks. And I like the detail in the fence. It's very detailed. And that's going to be my one area of a lot of detail. I'll probably simplify the foreground grasses here a bit more. But I'm going to leave that detail and have that be more the focal point. And the eye kind of follows that fence along till it gets to the adobe over here. My strongest color is probably the chimney, having that right of center. Strongest color that draws the attention, plus the pattern here of the snow kind of pulls the eye to the right and could have something, creates a stop here and pulls the eye back up to the shadow here and then the adobe and the chimney. And it kind of winds around again and hits those darks and comes down. So a little bit of thought of how the eye can kind of flow through here. The problem is this real strong line here and up here at the top of the shrubbery and tall grass is pretty much just horizontal and cuts the painting in half. So I could lift some of this up and break the fence a little bit, or show more of the fence in the ground and cut kind of a hole in this tall grass. Just something to break up that line might do that, or something here also to break up the flat plane line there. But again, going from here, this gives me what I want to start with. Photograph is just a place to start. Then coming up with 2 to 3 values for all the shape areas: mountains, trees, fence, tall shrubbery, and flat plane here. Everything's going to have 3 values, and then pick a color. And generally I do this with small color studies, 4x6, 3x5. You don't have to be very big, 4x7, whatever the shape is I want. And spend half an hour just coming up with those basic colors and values. And do it small so you're not stuck with working on something for all day long or for hours. Should be very quick, and do several of them where you change up the colors. But I want to get from this to some kind of more color saturation and more simplifying the values for each big shape area. I have another one here. This is in Colorado. It's an old mining town. Beautiful place. Every time I go there, it's always cloudy, so did not have any sunny days. But great composition here. The road, the nice verticals of the telephone poles, the old telephone poles, the pine trees, nice slanted area of the mountain. So there's a lot of angles of line. The strong angles on the side of the road, those create lines that pull you into the composition. The lines of the pine trees on the slope of the mountain going this way, and then these pine trees sloping down that way. So a lot of angles that are going against each other and create kind of more of a dynamic composition. Value-wise, does have darkest darks up front, lighter darks in the background, so the depth is pretty good. I'm basically wanting to create more saturation. And where do I want the strongest color? But I want to create a little more color variation in the trees, pine trees, and whatever kind of trees these are. These aren't pine. And kind of the shrubbery down here, and a little bit of color in the houses, while everything else is a bit more muted, but still more saturated in the photograph. Photograph is a very grayed down, it's a monochromatic green is what it is basically, with a touch of ochre thrown in. And again, nothing wrong with a painting with a muted palette that has good values and a good composition. Those work great, but I want to saturate this a bit more. So the first thing I want to do is create a bit more saturation in the background. Here in the middle ground on the slope of the mountain is going to be a bit stronger green, maybe a phthalo blue and ochre with a touch of cad yellow. And everything is muted or modified with something, whether it's a alizarin crimson, a red to modify the green, or burnt sienna, cad red medium, just something to knock it down slightly. Same color here, just a bit lighter. Then there's a flat area here that's more yellow-green, but again, very muted. So maybe ultramarine blue and cad yellow with a little bit of alizarin crimson. Then these mountains back in here are more blue-green, ultramarine blue, touch of ochre maybe. And then mountains back in here, just muted ultramarine blue. Blue with a little bit of orange or burnt sienna just to knock it down. So I'm going from very muted blue to a little stronger blue, muted blue-green and gradually getting stronger till get up here. But nothing will reach the value of these pine trees. They're my darkest dark as far as big shapes go. So they will really come forward and the mountains will stay back. I have that in the photograph pretty much. It's just dead color-wise. And that's what I want to do there. And then in the foreground, I want to create a bit more saturation in the lights of the trees. So the warmth of these trees will really come forward compared to the muted blue-green of the background mountains. And I have 3 values in these trees. The light, kind of a halftone dark. Halftone is that middle value between the lights and the darks, and it can reside in the light area, a little bit darker than the lights, or it can reside in the shadow. And that's kind of how I think of it. Most of the time, I think on a sunny day, the halftones are going to be on the light side. And the shadows will you still might have 2 shadows, a lighter shadow and a darker shadow. But here I just have 1 value in the lights and then 2 values in the shadow. That's my 3 values there to give it form. Pine trees, I just have 2 values. And that gives them enough shape, but not drawing too much attention to them. Then I'm going with a stronger, probably phthalo blue with a touch of ochre in it for the green building here. It could be Viridian with a little bit of ochre. Probably muted with some kind of red, cad red medium or alizarin or burnt sienna. A little stronger blue here on this building. Then I push that fence more of a violet. It's really no color in it there. So cloudy day, there's no direct sunlight. So I'm going to have a bit more color in it. Cloudy day doesn't mean all your colors are gray. It actually means your colors are a bit more saturated or rich with color because you don't have the bright light of sunlight washing them out. You always have to add white to the lights. And that's going to not wash out the color, but kind of mute it slightly. White does kill color. So if I don't have to add white, like to the violet of the fence, or much white, because there's no sunlight, or the greens here on the trees, they don't have as much white in there because of the lack of sunlight. So they're a bit richer, not as much white. Same thing on the road, a bit more orange than it would be on a sunny day. Now, a sunny day would have more contrast of cast shadow and sunlight, warm and cool. But cloudy day has a bit richer color in the lights. Then I got some real strong color over here. This might be a bit too strong for way over in the edge. I could move some of this strong Viridian maybe over here on some of the greenery, or maybe make this house, the greenhouse, a bit more of a Viridian to really stand out, because everything else is going to be more muted. This adds me more saturation in the color, especially the lights, and the 3 definite values helps me to simplify the shapes and work with the color a bit easier. Now I want to look at an artist that I think was very, in the same way, kind of very inventive, thinking outside the box color-wise. His name is Richard Bonington. Richard Parkes Bonington, British painter that lived in France, didn't live in England, I don't know why. But the amazing thing about him is he just lived 25 years, and his work is phenomenal. Really, really nice painting. So he was born in 1802, died in 1828. And what was different about his work was that while he painted more, the same classical style that artists did back then, he was during the Romantic period. So he's painting in a historical style of painting, but his color and brushwork and subject matter were outside the box for that time. And his work, very loose. I don't know, he painted about the same time John Constable. I don't know if he saw Constable's work and that influenced him, but very loose brushwork. Subject matter was different. It wasn't historical. He did some historical paintings, but not very much. But, this could be early 20th century, really different from the time. So time-wise, he was about the same time as Constable, who was older and lived longer, and same thing with J.W. Turner. So he was contemporaries of them, but his style was almost a bit more advanced. So really amazing, this brushwork on this landscape. I don't see that from anybody else during that time. Constable maybe on his big studies and outdoor sketches, but just great brushwork. Be interesting to see how they got their brushes back then. I don't think they had to make them. Somebody made them. But a lot of these big, flat, panoramic views of ocean, the coastal paintings with the boats, clouds. This is a little washed out. I've seen better images of this. More value changes in the clouds, but really nice brushwork, simplified more than a lot of the artists at the time. Almost a sketchy quality. He did have some more finished work, but these are really nice. Very accurate as far as the architecture. Some detail, but not overly done. Great compositions. Did a lot of sketches in watercolor, which I think was what everybody did. Some oils outside, but a lot of watercolors. Almost monochromatic, like a Payne's gray or a black and burnt sienna. Black would be your cooler color, burnt sienna, the warmer color. Could be a Payne's gray. I don't know if they had Payne's gray back then or not. So another one here, just monochromatic, either a brown ink or just a brownish watercolor. Sets up the whole composition. These little value studies in watercolor and pencil drawings is what he worked from. It's also another watercolor. Did a lot of watercolor, I assume, for sketches for oil paintings. But this is as good as any photograph. It's certainly a lot better than my photographs. I would much rather have his watercolors to work from than my old photographs. So get out there and do more color studies and do larger ones from them. Beautiful painting here. Those subtle value changes in the sky and the warm and cool contrast of the sunlit clouds and the more darker, cooler shadows in there. Not a great big file. The file's not very big, so it's hard to see some of it, but really nice. So another one, more detailed, architectural. These figures, really nice figures here. But very simple. While there's a lot of detail in the buildings, it is very simplified, loose, and has a nice looseness to it that you don't really see until the Impressionists. Yeah, not a huge file, so we don't get to see much, but very confident with the brush and really can see values well. So remember, if you have a box of the old photographs that you don't think you can use anymore, it'd be a good exercise to pull them out, use them as compositional studies, and come up with your own simplified values and color choices.